Welcome on the show, writer and actor Henry Shields, who co-wrote and starred in the West End's The Play That Goes Wrong. So, how does it feel to think about the scale of the success of The Play That Goes Wrong, from a 60-seat theatre above a pub to now being West End's longest running comedy, celebrating 10 years, being performed in Broadway, going on tours across the US, Australia, UK, being translated and performed professionally in over 30 countries. He also co-wrote and starred in BBC's The Goes Wrong show, Grown Ups, Peter Pan Goes Wrong, and many more.
You feel that sort of wave of laughter when 1,200 people laugh at once. It kind of hits you like a wall.
Went on to perform a segment of the play, the Royal Variety performance. How nerve-wracking was that?
The most nerve-wracking experience of my life. I stepped out in front of the audience, that spotlight came on, I completely lost my mind. You know, we're talking about doing musicals, we're talking about doing movies, we're talking about a new stage show, multiple new stage shows. We were still largely unknown, so we were still performing some nights to, I think the smallest audience was 6 people, which is tough.
Welcome on the show, Henry Shields. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm very well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being on here. Yeah, it's a great pleasure to have you on today. I've been a fan of everything Mischief since the Goes Wrong show, and just at the start of August, I managed to go and see it on the West End with my brother, and
Great.
It was really, really great. There was a great improv bit where I think your character, the inspector, he was trying to find is it a diary, I think? And it's supposed to be
the ledger.
Yeah, and it's supposed to be in the couch, but it's actually under the couch.
Yeah, exactly.
And then there was a kid from the audience that shouted out. He was like, "It's under the couch!"
Yeah,
and then,
excellent.
And then it just turned into like a panto, and like the audience was like, and he was like, "This." The actor was like, "Oh, this is not a panto," and we were like, "Oh, yes, it is." And it went on for like 5 minutes, just this full improv bit, and it was really good.
Yeah, brilliant. We do try and make that happen as much as possible because it is fully improvised. The actor has the freedom to do whatever they want, but the rule that we give them there when we're sort of training people up to play the part is that generally they will just keep looking for the ledger until the audience do something.
Yeah.
So it just keeps going and going and going until the audience get involved. And then the audience, it's just a bit of, the audience can say whatever they want, they can shout whatever they want, and he'll shout back. It's fun.
Yeah. Yeah, it was very fun. So if people don't know who you are, explain to them what you do.
So I'm Henry Shields. I'm an actor and a writer. I trained at drama school, and while I was at drama school, Lambda Drama School, I joined a improv group called, at the time they were called the Scat Pack, and then they renamed later to Mischief Theatre. And excuse me if you can hear that, I'm on a very busy main road. So then when I left drama school, we got together within our improv group and we decided to try writing scripted stuff. So we wrote a show that was called The Play That Goes Wrong, became called The Play That Goes Wrong. At the time it was called The Murder Before Christmas. And we staged it ourselves, we funded it ourselves, we put it on in London. It got more popular, it grew, it went to the Edinburgh Festival, it went on a UK tour, ended up in the West End, and since then we've been writing more and more plays, and we have a TV show that was on BBC called The Goes Wrong Show that's in the same theme, and we do lots of different things. We do stuff that's on the theme of things going wrong, so in the same vein we have shows in which it's all about an amateur theatre company putting on a play and everything going wrong. But we also have lots of other things like a show called A Comedy About a Bank Robbery that's more of a kind of Marx Brothers farce. We have a show called Grown Ups, which is a sort of coming of age comedy, and we have lots of things, and we have different plays in the pipeline now. So I'm a sort of actor, writer, sometime part producer-ish, part director-ish, just sort of get involved in everything a bit. That's what I
am. So let's go right back to the start. What were you like as a young child?
As a young child, initially very, very quiet. My parents called me Blob because you could literally put me down anywhere and I would just sit there in silence and watch the world go by. I think I was just kind of trying to take it all in. And then quite an awkward nerdy kid, I think, until I got to be a teenager and I started doing what I think a lot of awkward nerdy kids do, which is start turning to comedy as a way of socializing within a sort of rule structure, a way of making friends. So I became obsessed with comedies, watching every different comedy I could find, lots of stand-ups, lots of old sitcoms, and mimicking them and learning how to copy them and come up with my own jokes. And then just really, it stuck with me. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was the first leap into comedy for you through like
Yeah, I think
school and just
through wanting to socialize and not really knowing how to do it, not really having many friends. It's slightly tragic, but it tends to be the way I think for particularly a lot of stand-up comedians have a similar story where they started out. It's a means of just being able to communicate with people.
yeah. So when did that turn into starting to act?
Yeah, well, I mean, aside from all of the comedy, I did just generally enjoy acting, and I was in school plays and things like that a lot, for lots of reasons. I think I just had a bit of a knack for it. I was very good at learning lines and delivering them correctly, if that's a thing. As in hitting the intonations right, not necessarily that there's a right and wrong way to deliver lines, but delivering them with a sense of understanding. So I was good at it and enjoyed it. Uh, and I joined a company called the Summer Shakespeare Company that was, uh, I would call semi-professional theatre, and they performed yearly Shakespeare shows down in Kent at a place called Ellen Terry's house. Ellen Terry's an actor from the, I think, 19th or 18th century. She has a house that's a National Trust building, really beautiful house out in the middle of Kent in the sort of countryside. It's an amazing place. And they stage shows there occasionally. And I joined the company that was putting on Shakespeare plays there, did a few years of Shakespeare. That was a really fun way of easing into the professional world a bit more. Um, I was being paid very, very little, but I was being paid, so it still counts. And I actually still couldn't quite make up my mind what I wanted to do. And I ended up going to university and studying nursing for a little while, just because I really didn't know what to do, and I thought I had a vague interest in medicine. So I tried that, and I did that for a few months, and then dropped out and went to drama school.
So was like being an actor and going to drama school always the dream, but did you not see it as like achievable or?
I guess it was. It always would have been a dream, but I really never considered it an option, or it took a long time for me to consider it an option. Partly because of my family, I think, particularly my dad, was very uh, a very kind of financially driven man. It's just like you need to get a job that pays you money, you need a salary, you need a reliable source of income. That was always his attitude. So he really pushed for me to get into something a bit more mainstream and stable, because acting is a very, very unstable job.
Yeah.
But it just didn't take, and eventually I just had to force my hand a bit and say, like, look, the only thing I really want to try is acting, and then got to go to drama school and do it.
Yeah. So like as a kid, did you have the interest in writing or did that later develop down the line?
Yeah, that came a bit later. I was always very creative as a kid. I liked drawing a lot more than I did writing, actually. I was really into art and drawing random, weird, crazy pictures and just telling little stories through images. I really enjoyed that. And I sort of, when I was a kid, I wrote a lot of comic books, drew a lot of terrible comic books for myself. That was my way of writing. And it wasn't until, yeah, much later that I got into actual comedy writing. That came at university, actually. When I was studying nursing, or supposed to be studying nursing, I instead spent most of my time I joined the Comedy Society at King's College London and put on a sketch show that I wrote with a friend of mine, Joe Rizzonaldi. We got together and we were both really into comedy, and that was my first experience of properly writing comedy, of going, okay, let's sit down at a computer and write a script and put it on.
Yeah, and as you said, you dropped out of uni to go to LAMDA, which is one of the most prestigious drama schools in Britain. So, how did that feel, actually taking that step towards the dream that you never thought was possible of being an actor?
Yeah, it was amazing. Getting into drama school, I mean, What happened was I did a foundation year first, and then I did a full 3-year course. So the foundation year, uh, I didn't really know what I was getting myself into because I didn't know anyone who'd been to drama school. I didn't really know anyone who I didn't know enough about the industry to know how significant it was to go to drama school. I think at the time, I just thought, well, that's a fun thing. I'll go for that. And I got into the foundation course without too much difficulty. But then by the end of the foundation course, when I was reapplying to get on the main 3-year course, the actual proper acting course, then I had learned how big a deal it was. I think I'd come to realize how big Lambda was as a drama school, how prestigious it was, how difficult it was to get in, and how, I was in my class of 30, how desperate everyone was to get on that course. And I think about 5 of us did in the end. So that was a huge deal. And I remember very vividly getting the phone call to tell me I'd gotten into the 3-year course, getting that phone call from the president of was it president or head of drama, I think at the time, at Lambda, a guy called Rodney Cotier. And that was just, one of the most wonderful experiences, just that phone call, one of the most happy experiences of my life, I think.
Yeah, I can imagine. So there you went to meet Henry Lewis and Jonathan Sayer, who founded Mischief together in 2008. And then you went on to write numerous shows with them. So do you remember the first time you met?
Ooh, first time we met. I actually think that I ended up getting into Mischief through Charlie Russell, who's one of the women in the company who was in my year at drama school. And she recommended me to the guys because I was quite good at improv, and she'd seen that I was good at improv in class. So Henry Lewis, I think, just came up to me in the hall one day at Lambda and said, "Hi, I'm Henry. Do you want to come and join us for a rehearsal?" And that's where I would have met everyone else. I knew who they were before then because they were known within the school as the guys with this weird little improv group. And I really loved improv. So I'd been to see them at Canal Cafe Theatre doing what was at the time called Lights, Camera, Improvise. And I'd watched it and gone, oh, these guys are amazing. I wish I could join them. I really want to do improv. And then, amazingly, thanks to Charlie, Hen came and asked me to join without me even having to do anything, really.
Oh, so like you joined Mischief as it had already been established?
Yeah, exactly. I think it had been running for about a year and a half. They'd done one big trip to Edinburgh, and they were still getting established. They were still finding out who was going to stay in the company, who wasn't really interested at that stage. So I joined it, somewhere later on in the formation process.
Yeah, and you said that you went to see them do light camera improvised, and then that show got took to the Edinburgh Fringe. So were you in there at that point?
So yes, it started out with a show called Let's See What Happens that they did the year before I joined, and so obviously I never saw that show. I don't know if it was any good. They said it was a mixed bag, I think. And then they did that with a big group of people from Lambda. Excuse me. And some of those people stayed in the company. Some of the people said, "Yeah, this isn't for me," and moved on. And so the people that remained, they then renamed the show Lights, Camera, Improvise, and that's about the time when I joined. So I was there for the first time Lights, Camera, Improvise went to Edinburgh under that name. That's when I was there.
So would you explain to the audience what the show was, the Light, Camera, Improvised, and how successful was it at that first year that you did it at the Edinburgh Fringe?
Yeah, okay. So Lights, Camera, Improvise, it's an improv show. It's long form improv, which for the uninitiated means it's one long story from the beginning to the end. We'll take a bunch of suggestions from the audience, and then essentially we just go for a full hour. And within that hour, we will try to tell a cohesive story with a beginning, a middle, and end. There'll be main characters. There'll be probably a protagonist and an antagonist. It will follow the basic story structure, all within the aesthetic of it's a movie being done on stage. So we do things like pause the action, rewind, fast forward. We do cutaways to director's commentary, things like that, but all done on a stage. So that's what the show is. And then the first time I joined it in Edinburgh, it was a place called C Venues, which I don't think even exists anymore in Edinburgh at the Fringe. I think it's been renamed something else. But it was kind of the lowest of the low in terms of what, in terms of venue quality and prestige, had none of that. So it was a really kind of crappy, cheap venue for the shows that don't have an established following yet. And it was mixed. We'd have some shows really full. Weekends tend to be pretty full. Midweek, pretty empty. And the shows were not of a great quality. I think that we would have really good shows, usually at the weekend when it's nice and full, and then we'd have really bad shows in the middle of the week because we were all still completely new to it. We didn't really understand enough about story structure to be able to do them well, and we didn't understand enough about improv, and we didn't have the confidence to be able to do them well. So it was, it was messy. It was really fun. I had so much fun doing it because it was just a group of really good friends getting together and trying to make each other laugh. In terms of professional quality, it wasn't quite there yet, but of course it wasn't. That's what you have to do in order to learn how to be better.
Yeah, that's so true. And then eventually, so you went on and you were all living together, working day jobs, when you wrote The Play That Goes Wrong, known as then The Murder Before Christmas. So explain to me the whole process of that, thinking of the original idea to writing a full hour-long play, because before then, Mischief had just been an improv group, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. We've been an improv group. So the process started, I would say, with my leaving drama school because Henry and John were in the year above me. They'd already graduated and they'd seen how bleak the acting industry was for a year. It's really, really tough. It takes so long to get anywhere. And you spend most of your time working a minimum wage job. So we were all living together. I'd just come out of drama school and we'd moved in together. And so that was the first opportunity where all three of us were there to say, okay, let's try and do something that's not improv, that's going to generate some momentum. Because, by that point, we'd been doing Lights, Camera, Improvise for 5 years. And it had been growing and growing in Edinburgh gradually, but there was no real prospects of it ever paying a wage, of it ever really covering its costs and being successful enough to stand on its own 2 feet. So we were desperate to do something at least a bit more mainstream. And we knocked some different ideas around, and it was Henry Lewis who had previously worked on a sort of short comedy thing he'd written as part of an acting workshop with Michael Green. Michael Green, you could say, is the inspirational force behind The Play That Goes Wrong, I think. He wrote a book called The Art of Coarse Acting, which is all about this style of theatre, this sort of amateur comedy, amateur group putting on a show for comedy purposes thing. He wrote a book all about that, and he used to do lots of little short pieces. He wrote a book of plays that were all 15, 20 minutes long. Henry Lewis had done a course with the guy and had written his own one as an exercise. He'd written a 10-minute comedy murder mystery thing. And so we were looking for something to do, and Hen had this script, 10 minutes of what ended up being the first scene of The Play That Goes Wrong. And he brought it to us, and we the three of us just sat up and worked on it, and we just tried to expand it and build the idea out. And we ended up with something about 45 minutes long, I think. And we took it into one of our Mischief group meets where we'd sit in a room and talk about different ideas. And we read it out, and everyone really loved it. And there was in the room, even on that first read, there was a real feeling of, oh, you guys have found something. This is something really, really good. Everyone was really excited, which is pretty rare with a new script. And so we knew, oh, we got something. And we then agreed to fund it. By this point, Mischief had saved, I think, about £9,000 we had in the bank from 5 years of going to Edinburgh and never paying any of us anything. So all of us working for free, we managed to scrape together £9,000. And that was our pot that we used to go to Edinburgh every year. So we needed that £9,000 to be able to afford the next Edinburgh, to get us up there and hopefully make it bigger. So it was a big gamble. We said, let's just put everything into this actual play and try it out and see what we get. And we put it on at the Old Red Lion Theatre in Islington, in this little pub theatre. And it went well. People liked it. It was really fun. It was really funny, but we were still largely unknown. So we were still performing some nights to, I think the smallest audience was 6 people. Which is tough. Yeah, really tough.
Yeah,
Uh,
I can imagine.
yeah,
W-
we ran it
w-
for a month. Sorry.
Was the cast bigger than the audience
Yep.
on stage?
Yep. Yep. Cast of 8, audience of 6 one night. But we persisted, did it anyway. That wasn't a great night, if I'm honest. But you have to do these things. You have to put up with them to get anywhere. So we ran it for a month, and we were really pleased with it, but it had lost a lot of money. We'd made some of it back. We weren't in a terrible position. Um, but we'd lost a lot of money and it hadn't really done anything. But then we got a call a few months later from the owner of the venue, the Old Red Lion, or the artistic director of the venue, saying that he really loved our show and he thought it was really building some momentum at the point where our run ended. So would we like to come back and do another run and give it another go? And he gave us a slightly better deal, and we took him up on it. We came back, and that run we pretty much sold out, and that was where it actually
Wow.
caught on. And I mean, it was only a 50-seat venue, so it wasn't wasn't amazing, but it was really nice that by the end of the run we were overselling. We had people kind of standing in the aisles to come and see the show, see this weird little hidden gem show. That was incredible, and that's when we really knew we were onto something, I think.
Yeah, like how did it feel to have the show that you co-wrote like actually on stage?
Yeah, I mean, really nice. I mean, at that point, Mischief had actually done a few different shows. Each Edinburgh, for the previous 2 years, they'd taken up a show um, under different scripted shows, but they were not really viable. There was one show called The Buffoons, which was based in the French. Not to go down a whole rabbit hole here, but in a French theatrical style called Buffon, which is a style of comedy that is very niche, very specific to rural France, really, that came from medieval France. And it's all about insulting the audience, essentially. It's all about creating a safe space in which the performers are sort of grotesque monsters that say really insulting things and really offensive things. Let's not go down that rabbit hole unless you particularly want to. It's really good. It's really good style, but it's niche. So they'd done a show based on that had taken to Edinburgh that had failed, as these things do, and then they'd done another show called Mogic, which was a real kind of morphed precursor to the Goes Wrong stuff, actually, about a magician putting on a show that that had all gone wrong, and it was being don't need to go down that rabbit hole either. But we'd had a bit of experience putting stuff on, and we'd done the improv show. So it wasn't a huge leap to get something on, to just write it and stage it. The big leap was putting something on that people actually responded to. Not that people didn't respond to Buffon and Mogic, but they were never quite sharp enough. They were never quite good enough to catch on, to catch fire in the way that Play That Goes Wrong did. And that
Yeah.
was what was really exciting.
I can really imagine. And like if I told you at the end of that original run at the old Red Lion Theatre that in 12 years' time it would be the longest running comedy on the West End with a run
Mm.
of 10 years, one of only 2 plays currently running with over 3,000 performances on the West End, being performed to 2,800 people a week in New York, 3,952 people a week in London. What would you have said to me?
I just said that's weirdly specific. I no, I mean, obviously, I would not have believed you in the slightest. After that first run at the Old Red Lion, we thought it was done, and we were happy with it. What a nice little run we've done, but we definitely thought it was over. I also think at that stage the show wasn't quite as good as it is now. Wasn't anywhere near as good as it is now, but it wasn't quite ready. There was a lot of potential within it, but as I said, it was only 45 minutes long. And actually, the last 10, 15 minutes of the show, because we didn't have enough material, we did a bit where we would we'd finish the show, we'd bow, the lights would go down, we'd come back up, and then we'd take chairs and we'd sit in a line in front of the audience and we'd say, any questions? And in character, we would do an interview with the audience where we do a Q&A where we would try and come up with sort of improvised comedy answers to their questions about the show. It was very ropey, and sometimes we managed to do it well and find a good little punchline and stuff like that. But it really was a gimmick to try and fill that extra bit of time to get us up to the hour. So it was really it wasn't the polished show that it needed to be. It was just something with a lot of potential. So yeah, end of that first run, I'd have said you're joking if you think this is going anywhere. It wasn't
Yeah.
until probably midway through the second run that I might have started to think there's a future in it.
Yeah, and what a future it was. And the show then got transferred to Trafalgar Studios and then on tour, which I read somewhere you thought would be about 6 weeks. It ended up being 24 and finishing in the West End where it's never left.
Yeah.
So what was your reaction to like to the show being given the opportunity to be performed to have a run on the West End?
Oh well, that was really interesting. That I've talked about this a few times. That there were certain milestones in the process of the play that goes wrong, getting bigger and bigger, that really felt like huge leaps forward. And weirdly, the West End wasn't actually one of them. The one that I can talk you through the ones that were there. The first one was when we got into Pleasance, Edinburgh. For those who don't know, Pleasance is one of the big uh, umbrella venues in Edinburgh that has loads of little venues within it. And it's a really good one of the really big ones, probably the best one for comedy. And we'd spent 5 years doing Lights, Camera, Improvise and never being able to get into Pleasance. It was always our dream, get into Pleasance, and we were stuck at C venues. And we'd every year apply and every year get knocked down. And while we were doing the second run at the Old Red Lion, we managed to get the head of the booker for Pleasance to come and watch Play That Goes Wrong. And they took us on and said, yeah, you can have a venue at Pleasance. That felt like a huge step forward. That felt like the thing we'd been trying to do for 5 years finally happening. I remember that being massive. The next big step forward was when we took the show on tour to Canterbury. And we'd just finished our run at Pleasance in Edinburgh, and we'd done a special last 2 nights, I think we did in Edinburgh, in a slightly bigger venue, in a 300-seater, because we'd sold out the initial run, which is really nice. And we performed to an audience of about 300. That felt massive. And then the first night of the tour was in Canterbury in a 1,200-seat venue. The first time any of us had played a big venue. That is a big venue, 1,200 seats. We did the show there, and it went really, really well. It was also the first time the show was 2 acts long. We'd added a whole second half. That went really well, and that again felt like a massive step forward to go from little fringe venue to giant #1 touring venue, 1,200 seats. That was incredible, an amazing night. But then going from the tour to the West End weirdly just kind of felt like part of the process at that point. It was really nice. It was really cool. But we also didn't really get our hopes up. We thought, oh, we'll go for a nice little run in the West End. It will probably do 4 or 5 weeks, something like that, and it will be a nice way to end the tour. And we were really happy to do it, and we were like, that'll be a lovely little cherry on the cake. But it didn't feel like the massive step forward that actually it probably was. But at the time we just thought it'll be a temporary thing.
So my next question was going to be like, what was the feeling on opening night of the West End? But I'm going to actually change it. What was the feeling on the opening night at Cambridge doing that massive venue?
Yeah, Canterbury, not Cambridge. But
Canterbury,
yes,
sorry.
it was incredible. It was really daunting because there is a world of difference between a 300-seater and a 1,200-seater. And the Canterbury Marlow, lovely place, really, really nice theatre. It's huge. It's standing on that stage, looking out, you feel like you're in a concert hall. You feel like you're in an arena, and it's all these different banks of seats going up and all the way back. It's amazing. And to have it, we had it really full that first night, and you feel that sort of wave of laughter when 1,200 people laugh at once. It kind of hits you like a wall. It's amazing. And I can very arrogantly say I've gotten used to it now, and it doesn't faze me anymore. But at the time, it really, I mean, it was in the nicest way. It shook me, in the nicest way.
Yeah.
I came out and did that opening speech, really nervous. The show opens with me doing a sort of 2-minute monologue. Got the laughs, and they felt incredible. And I came backstage and said to everyone that this is different. This is really different. We didn't even really we didn't really understand how much we'd have to pause, because when you've got an audience that size, the laughs take longer. They take a long time to sort of ripple through. So, we'd gone from little tiny intimate venues where everything was very, very immediate to having to do a joke and then actually wait for the laughter to subside before you can move on to the next bit. You know, it's a big learning curve doing that.
Yeah, I can imagine that feeling must have
Mm.
just been so like overwhelming.
Yeah, yeah,
And as
it
you
was
said,
incredible.
thought about the West End run was going to be about 5 weeks. It went on to be a lot longer than that. And in 2015, you went on to win the Olivia Award for Best New Comedy. If people don't know that, that's basically the Oscars for theatre in the UK.
Yeah,
Um, how did that feel? Like hearing the play that goes wrong get announced, going up on stage, and accepting that award?
terrifying. All I really remember from that night is terror because I had to do the speech. I'd volunteered to do it, and we were certain we weren't going to win. I can't tell you how certain we were, like absolutely certain we weren't going to win because we were up against Shakespeare in Love, and we thought that's obviously going to win. Like it's this huge, big budget Sonia Friedman show. Everybody's going mad for it. All the critics love it. Like we were absolutely certain we were going to lose. So when we won that, it was just total shock, um, and complete surprise. And we went up on stage, and I gave the speech that I had prepared in a complete daze. Hadn't My brain hadn't caught up with what was happening, so I have no memory of it. I've seen the video, and I'm like, oh god, that's embarrassing. And then, you know, sometime a couple of hours later, when everything calmed down a bit, I think I kind of realized what it was. But it took that long to settle in. It was amazing.
Yeah, that feeling must have just been immense there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was huge, absolutely huge, and it felt felt like we'd stepped into another world briefly. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you went on to perform a segment of the play, at the Royal Variety performance in 2015. Your character, appeared alongside Kylie Minogue.
Mm.
So how nerve wracking was that?
The most nerve-wracking experience of my life. I mean, I've talked about other milestones. That was a big one. So going from 1,200 seats to 5,000, which is the Royal Albert Hall, I think it's 5,000. That again was a huge step up. And then, you know, you genuinely are in an arena. Um, that was the most scared I've ever been in my life, doing that opening speech, that those 2 minutes just alone in a spotlight to 5,000 people and to cameras showing it to millions of people. A big, big step up. Um, and the way those things work is you're always told to arrive quite early in the morning because you have a slot in the day where you will go on stage and do your tech rehearsal. So they'll check all the lights and positioning and all that stuff. So we'd arrived at 9 a.m., something like that. We were put in a room downstairs, a little kind of tiny dressing room, and just told to wait. Then we came up in the middle of the day, did our little slot, and then went back downstairs and had to wait again. We'd spent By the time we got on stage, we'd spent about 10 hours just sat in a room in silence, basically, just getting more and more nervous. It's the worst way to prepare for
Oh,
something like that. And I
yeah.
had spent the whole time just going over and over that speech, desperate not to make a mistake, again and again and again, just on a loop, 10 hours of saying that speech to myself. So I'd gone completely insane by the time we got on stage. And I stepped out in front of the audience. That spotlight came on. I completely lost my mind. I mean, like lost my mind as in like I couldn't think anymore. All the thoughts went out of my head, and I did the whole speech on autopilot. And thankfully, because I'd spent 10 hours saying it to myself, my brain was able to do that and just sort of my mouth just took over, and I said the speech completely by rote. But I was terrified. My heart was beating out of my chest. I was sweating. And if you watch the video back, I actually don't look like that at all. I look quite calm. I think I'd gone into a kind of robotic mode and just did it. But in my mad little lizard brain, there's just chaos going on in there. Total terror and chaos. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it sounds dreadful. It's always worse when you have to wait to perform something. Like
It is, yeah.
when you have time to think about it.
Yeah. And it was
And
just a big step
on
up.
that scale, it must have been like massive.
Yeah. It was because it was such a big step up. We'd gone from the West End, our venue in the West End is 500 seats, and we've been doing that for a long time at that point. So I'd gotten used to that, and it was the first time we did anything on anything like that scale. And with all those celebrities and with cameras, we'd not done anything with cameras by that point. So it was a real plunge into the deepest of deep ends, you know, to get that
Yeah.
done. Kylie Minogue was fun though, and Jack Whitehall, they were lovely.
Yeah, I can imagine. So like a show like The Play That Goes Wrong must take a lot of rehearsing with the stunts and also pulling off a show that makes like looks like it's a mistake when it's actually planned. But so that must take a lot of rehearsing and a lot of time.
It does, yes. You have to be very specific with all of that stuff. I mean, the origins of The Play That Goes Wrong could also be traced to one of our teachers at drama school, Mark Bell, who taught us clowning. Um, and when I say clowning, for those who don't know, it doesn't mean like circus clowns, although that's sort of a branch of clowning. It means French clowning, which is taught at Lecoq school in a drama school in France, or I don't know if it's called a drama school, but we were taught that by Mark Bell, and it's all about accessing your own personal clown, who you naturally are. So, the silliest side of yourself, accessing your vulnerability and accessing your who you are in a stupid way. Like you take elements of yourself and expand them. So for me to play Chris Bean in Play That Goes Wrong, it's really just playing myself, but slightly more pompous, slightly more arrogant, slightly more insecure version of myself. So it's always coming from you. And Mark Bell then went on to direct The Play That Goes Wrong midway through the first run, and he's the director of that show. So that's the place you have to start. You have to have done a lot of training in clowning in order to be able to do The Play That Goes Wrong, and then the process of putting it on and creating, rehearsing, is a lot of very detailed clown work. And yeah, every joke has to be timed perfectly. Every intonation, every movement has to be really specific. It is kind of more like choreographing a dance than it is like rehearsing a play, I would say.
Yeah, and like has there ever been any like injuries or not?
Yep. There've been quite a few injuries over the years. I think partly because early on in the process we weren't being as safe. Basically, we didn't have all the health and safety precautions in place that we should have done, but we weren't a big enough production to have that. So we have had two dislocated shoulders.
Oh,
Same guy, different shoulders, one of each. Uh,
oh,
we've had a broken foot. I managed to herniate a disc in my neck. We've
oh.
had, yeah, we've had, I don't know what the term for it is, but Charlie Russell's hips have been medically ruined. They've been ruined, whatever the medical term for ruined is.
Have been ruined.
They've been ruined by The Play That Goes Wrong. I think Nancy, in one of the weirdest ones, there's a bit in the show where Nancy's character Annie has a mint. She's supposed to be taking a pill. Her character's taking a pill for her anxiety or whatever. She takes it and then she goes, "Oh, it's a mint," and we used real mints for that. And what it meant was over the course of the run of The Play That Goes Wrong, a year and a half we did, she was having a mint every night and then sucking the whole thing down to nothing. And she ended up completely needing like a root canal in one of her teeth because there was so much sugar in it. So now I think they don't even take them in. Now I think in the show people pretend to take them in and then throw it away or something like that, or they
It's
spit it
just the
out or
moon.
something. But yeah, she ruined her teeth just from having one mint a night for 18 months.
Oh,
Yeah, mad. So lots
I
of injuries, lots of weird little things.
So, how does it feel to think about the scale of the success of The Play That Goes Wrong from a 60-seat theatre above a pub to now being West End's longest running comedy, celebrating 10 years, being performed in Broadway, going on tours across the US, Australia, UK, being translated and performed professionally in over 30 countries, including India, Brazil, South Korea, China, and so many more? How does that feel?
It feels very nice. It feels very, very good. I think that as lovely as it is, I think I'm not, as a person, I'm not programmed to allow myself to be too happy. Weirdly, I think that a part of me looking at all of that can only see the inevitable downfall. I can only think, okay, this can't last forever, though. There must be surely at some point it's all going to come crashing down. So don't get too relaxed, don't get too complacent. So there's a part of me that will always be doing that. So I can't really revel in it. But it is amazing. I'm so grateful to have gotten this far, and that it's still going is incredible. But I'm preparing myself for the inevitable crash that's got to come after such a high. You know,
Yeah. Like having a show, like watching a show that you co-wrote in a language you don't understand must be such a so real experience.
yeah, it's amazing. I've done that a couple of times. I've seen it in French and I've seen it in Norwegian. Those are the two places that I went to visit. And it was amazing. It was really fun. I mean, I speak a bit of French, so that one wasn't too odd for me. And it was a slightly different production. The Norwegian one was really fun because I have no Norwegian at all. Didn't understand a word of it, so it was just kind of like seeing a show in gibberish, but where I knew, what was technically what was going on because I knew the script so well. That was really fun. And occasionally there'd be little new physical bits that you'd notice. I suppose when you don't understand any of what's being said, you watch the movements much more closely. So I was able to pick up the tiny little nuances of the different physical jokes they'd added in. There's some great stuff there. I love the
I
Norwegian
can
production.
I can imagine that. It must just be such a weird experience. Another thing in in like the level of success of the known of the play that goes wrong. It was even slightly featured in a Simpsons episode. So how did that feel?
Wasn't there? Someone put that on our
Yeah,
little WhatsApp group that there
it
was like
was
it was the Edinburgh Fringe
Edinburgh
sign,
Fringe, and
right?
then the play that goes wrong goes wrong. That
Yeah,
that was at the bottom of the sign. Just a
quite
slight
apt.
little.
Yeah, it's a really nice little touch. That's lovely. I mean, I think that's probably down to Mike Reese, I guess, who's one of the Simpsons creators, and we've met him a couple of times, and he's a fan of the show. So he came to see it with his partner in London, and we said hi to them afterwards, and then we went over to LA for a totally different thing. We were pitching an idea years ago, and we met up with them while we were there, and they gave us a tour of the Simpsons lot, and we got to meet the writers and stuff. So I think that's probably where that reference came from a personal connection, rather than us just being that famous. But that's very cool. I love that we're in the Simpsons in the tiniest way that we've made it into the Simpsons Bible. It's cool.
Yeah. So the play that goes wrong being a massive success internationally, what do you think that resonates with audiences, regardless of culture and language, about a production that's built around everything going wrong?
Yeah, well, it's interesting, isn't it? We're often asked that. What is it that makes it so universal? I mean, partly it's because it's slapstick, and slapstick is works in every language. It's always funny seeing someone fall down, tickles us all. Uh, it's partly, I think, the amateur theatre thing is very ubiquitous. Every country, everywhere has its own version of amateur theatre that most people, or a large enough chunk of people, have tried at some point. So there's a real connection to the audience there, and I think um, it's partly because it's based in clowning, and as I mentioned earlier, clowning is very much founded on human vulnerability. It's all about your own insecurities, exposing a part of yourself. And when I'm teaching people clowning, which I've done occasionally, that's the starting point will usually be that you need to be comfortable being yourself on stage, because that's what you're doing when you're clowning. You're not putting on a character. You're not placing on the actor's mask. You're being you. You have to be comfortable letting us see your actual whatever it is. For me, like when I'm playing Chris, like I say, it's a bit of arrogance, it's a bit of pomposity. You have to be comfortable saying to an audience of people, I, Henry Shields, am a little bit arrogant, I'm a little bit pompous, and I'm going to take that and I'm going to expand it, and I'm going to overdo it a little bit, and I'm going to show it to you for your enjoyment. I'm going to let you laugh at me, not just at me as an actor, but at me as a person. I'm going to take a part of myself, put it on display, and say, laugh at that because I'm flawed and I'm silly, and that's the core of clowning. If you can do that, then you'll be really, really good at it. You'll be really, really funny. And I think that closeness to the human condition, that closeness to our own personal feelings and insecurities is what makes it really resonate with audiences, I think.
Yeah, I can see that. And then obviously you also went on to create Peter Pan Goes Wrong, which had its premiere in 2013. What led you to writing that show?
So Peter Pan, the idea for Peter Pan actually came about during the run at the Old Red Lion, I think the second run, where we started talking about, well, what would we do if we wanted to do a sequel to this? Um, and looking at it now, having seen both finished products, I think that The Play That Goes Wrong is very much a sort of purist clown game where there's no real story. It's just clown, it's just jokes, as many jokes as you can get into 2 hours, and it's really pure clown performance. Peter Pan, we wanted to expand on that, so we kept as much of that as we can, but we wanted to tell a story. We wanted to have an actual emotional core to it. So the idea for doing Peter Pan generally came about. I think that was initially my suggestion of just we want another title we can do. We want to try something that's based on an existing title and something that gives us lots of toys to play with. We always talk about it in those terms. We say when we're writing a thing goes wrong thing, we want to give ourselves an environment in which there are lots of toys to play with. Peter Pan, you've got magic, you've got flying, you've got multiple different scenes, you've got a dog, you've got pirates, Captain Hook, ships, fighting, sword fights, all of that stuff going on. And all of that we could just see without even having written a word. We could see that's a lot of toys. There's a ton of stuff there for us to make jokes out of. And then tied into that was the idea of, as I say, wanting to tell a real story. So the characters of Max and Sandra in that show have a love story going on that is happening behind the scenes, and the audience is sort of getting little glimpses of it as the show goes on, and more information is divulged through accidents and sound clips playing and things. And that was a real step forward, I think, from The Play That Goes Wrong for us. We wanted to we wanted to prove to the world and to ourselves we can do more than just gags, that we have a little bit of depth to us.
Yeah. So then it obviously went on to tour the UK multiple times, had multiple Christmas seasons in the West End, and went on to have a successful run in Broadway last year. So how did that achieving that level of success again, back to back after The Play That Goes Wrong? How was that actually
Yeah,
doing it again?
that was great. If anything, it was a bit of a relief, I think, because there was a feeling of, when we just done The Play That Goes Wrong, there was definitely a feeling of, are we just a one-hit wonder? Are we just we got really lucky and we can never do it again? So it was great to be able to prove to ourselves and to the audiences and to the producers in particular that we had a little bit more to give than just one show. And Peter Pan actually was much better received than The Play That Goes Wrong. Even though over the long term, The Play That Goes Wrong has had more success, probably. They've both been successful shows, but Play That Goes Wrong has sort of dwarfed Peter Pan a bit. But Peter Pan, by that point, we were established enough that the critics were a bit less snooty, I'd say. So when they came to see Peter Pan in the West End, they were much kinder, and we got a lot more favourable reviews. Because actually, Play That Goes Wrong, for all its success, only ever really got average reviews. It was only ever seen by the critical industry as being okay.
Yeah. And then so it was a big success, and it was also adapted into a 1 hour television special for the BBC. So how did that come about, and how did it feel to see your show on TV screens?
Yeah, that was great. I mean, that was when we were talking to the BBC and BBC Studios about is there a TV show we can do? Is there a sitcom format, half hour episodes TV show we can do? And they were looking at different ways of pitching it. They were trying to find the right angle. And Chris Sussman, who was the head of comedy at the time at BBC Studios, I think, came to see Peter Pan Goes Wrong. And I remember we had a drink with him afterwards, and he said, let's just do this. This is the way in. Just do Peter Pan on TV to show that the whole thing can work. This will be the way we prove to all the BBC executives that this can work as a TV format. And so we did, and there was the requirement that we have a name. It's definitely, we need a name, a star, to give it a sort of stamp of approval. And through a friend of a friend, I think, we got in contact with David Suchet and got someone to recommend it to him. And he turned out to be brilliant. I think one of my favorite people we've ever worked with. We've worked with a few different celebrities and stars over the years. He really stands out as just being one of the ones where we got so lucky. We kind of struck gold the first time, finding this guy who completely understood it. I remember the first meeting we had with him. He said, "This is my understanding of it. I should play it as if everything is completely real, and I am taking it utterly seriously and trying my best to do a perfect performance in Peter Pan." And we're like, "That's it. You've got it." That's not every actor's instinct. A lot of people play up the comedy and they ham it up and they do a bit of a panto thing. He got it first time and was just the loveliest man to work with. I can't praise David Suchet enough. So he carried it a lot, definitely lifted the whole thing and helped us get it into the mainstream. And yeah, the process of making it was a lot of fun. It was great that it is an existing thing, so all the material was really tried and tested. Which helped make it, the process of making it was a bit more relaxed, a bit easier. We knew that it was going to work. It wasn't as easy with Christmas Carol, which came next, which was all new material. But yeah, Peter Pan was great.
I hope you are enjoying the interview so far. Please do subscribe if you aren't already, because there are some more great interviews coming your way. Then you went back to doing plays and stuff, with the success of The Play That Goes Wrong and Peter Pan. You had to follow it again. So was that hard? You eventually did follow it with the comedy about a bank robbery. Robbery, which opened in 2016 and had an almost 4-year run. So you did manage to have that success after it without also the Goes Wrong name behind it. So how was that?
Yeah, that was a big step. That was, again, another milestone, I think, because it didn't feel like we couldn't do it. It felt like a natural step to us because we were just so excited to try something other than a Goes Wrong thing and just say, look, we're funny people. Can we write something that's just funny in a different way? Fourth wall comedy that's a big, crazy slapstick farce that doesn't rely on it being Goes Wrong. And we were partly proving that to ourselves again, and again, partly proving that to the producers that it could be done. And it really wasn't, it was very experimental. It felt like we were taking a shot in the dark, but it helped that we had 2 big successes before that. So I think the producers were willing to take a punt on it. And Comedy About a Bank Robbery, I think to this day remains the show we've done that I'm the most proud of. I'm really, really proud of that show. It's not perfect, but I think it's very, very, very good. Probably the most the most accomplished script we've written in terms of its density of jokes, but also complexity of its characters and its storyline and the creativity in its staging. Lots of different, really brilliant creative ideas in that show. So I'm really, really proud of that show, and it totally deserved to succeed. It could have gone longer. It should have stayed in the West End, I think, a bit longer, but unfortunately, it didn't catch fire in the same way. I think it was probably overshadowed by the Goes Wrong shows, and then it ran up until COVID hit, and it didn't have the momentum to come back afterwards. But I'd love to bring back Comedy About a Bank Robbery one day, because I really love that show. We all do. I think within Mischief, when we talk about it, that's the one that everyone talks about as being their favorite.
Yeah. So you did manage to actually come up with it and actually achieve without the Goes Wrong name. In 2017, then The Play That Goes Wrong opened on Broadway. So did that feel like a big thing? Did that feel like a big step to be in America? And how did that feel on opening night?
Yeah, definitely a big step. And yeah, again, opening night is always terrifying, no matter what. But yeah, another big, scary opening night in a 900-seater, I think that theatre was. So not so big, but scary in that it's a crowd that didn't know who we were, and we were kind of starting back at square one. It was a really fun experience. I loved living in New York. That first time around, I was living basically in Times Square, like just off Times Square in a really nice hotel. It's an apartment building. And I loved the experience. I think by that point, I'd been doing The Play That Goes Wrong for about 3 years, or just under 3 years. So I was starting to struggle with doing that same show every night. Like, it was starting to wear me down. So unfortunately, I didn't enjoy. I can honestly say I didn't enjoy doing the show that much. Like that was the least fun part of it for me. What I loved was being in New York, being in America, and all the new experience. But I think for a lot of us, not everyone, but for some of us, that we were already a little bit tired of doing the show by that point.
Yeah, I can imagine. Like 3 years is quite a long time to do one
It,
particular show, like
um,
8 shows a week.
yeah, well over 1,000 performances, and particularly my part. Not to make it all about me, but my part is I'm on pretty much all of the show. There's a 20-minute gap where I'm off stage, and but the rest of the 2 hours I'm on stage. So it's quite exhausting, doing that show. It's very mentally and physically demanding. So yeah, by year three, I was kind of struggling to get through it a little bit.
I can imagine. So does the audience feel different when you take a show to America compared to the UK?
Well, they're different. There are differences. Audiences in America are much more vocal. They're much more ready and willing to get involved and shout out. Even if you don't want them to, you have to keep them on a very tight leash, I would say, American audiences. Because if there are bits of the show where we encourage the audience to shout out, like the thing you mentioned right at the beginning, the ledger bit. There's things like that where the audience, we give them free reign to do whatever they want, and it's very difficult in America to get them back into to get them out of that zone, to get them to, okay, you've had your fun, now calm down and stop shouting. It's very easy for them to get carried away and then the rest of the show is just audience interaction basically, and you lose control of what's happening. So that's the thing you have to keep an eye on. And I've also found that they have a lower tolerance for dark, edgy humor. There's not a lot of dark, edgy humor in our work. We tend to be pretty light and family friendly. But there's certain sections of Peter Pan Goes Wrong where I, as Chris Bean, as Captain Hook, would again do a lot of audience interaction. There's a bit where I can't open a bottle because I've got a hook, and I get a child in the audience to help me do it. And I would always have these little improv bits with children where I'd sort of insult them and make fun of them and do little jokes to them and stuff. And the audience in the UK, I can say anything. There is nothing too dark. There's nothing too mean. I can insult their intelligence. I can make fun of their parents. I can say they've been badly educated. I can say all this stuff, and the audience will laugh no matter what. The darker it is, the funnier it is. In America, that is not the case. They will. There's a certain point. There's a very fine line. If you cross that line, then they genuinely turned against me a few times and really didn't enjoy it. So that's the big differences between American and British audiences. But more generally, in terms of enjoying the show, no, they enjoy it just as much, I think, and it goes down just as well there as anywhere else.
So
Mm-hmm.
I suppose with America, you kind of just have to slightly adapt and see how the audience responds.
Yeah, yeah. There's a bit of a learning curve, um, but they just have different sensibilities, and it wasn't too hard to adapt. It just takes a little bit of practice. Certainly, during our run last year of Peter Pan on Broadway, there were a few shows where I felt like I lost them. It wasn't often, but a few shows where I stepped over that line and I went, they genuinely don't like me now. They don't like me, not just as the character Chris Bean, they don't like Henry Shields. I've managed to make them really not like me as a person. And that's not what you want. You never want
Yeah.
them to actually dislike you. So I hit that a few times and had to recalibrate. Yeah.
Oh dear.
Mm,
Um, in 2019, then Mischief Theatre went on to open a year-long West End run with multiple different shows.
mm.
It started with Grown Ups, and then Magic Goes Wrong, but sadly was forced to close due to COVID. And there was supposed to be a third and final show,
Mm.
which was it ever revealed, and will it ever be
I
revealed?
think that it might have been on a poster at some point. There was the third show, the name of the show, and a bit of artwork was out there. Um, at the time, it was called Spies. It's been renamed since, and it is currently in the works. Yeah, we're hoping to have it on next year. Where we've written a script and we're workshopping it. We're about to go into a big workshop to hone the script and try it out and try it in front of a couple of invitee audiences. But it may never happen is the thing, because it's a very big, expensive show. if it's not quite good enough, it it will never see the light of day.
Yeah. So how was COVID for you in the company generally, with the theatre industry having to fully close down?
Yeah, I think it was tough. It was tough for us, just as it was tough for everyone. The entire theatre industry closed down. So, from a very personal point of view, that basically meant my income went from a normal income to zero uh, overnight, pretty much. But as a writer, it wasn't impossible because I was able to work from home. So, during that time, I wrote an entire play, and me and Hen and John wrote a lot of Goes Wrong show episodes during lockdown. We wrote them over Zoom, and so I was able to, get a lot of work done still. So it wasn't too bad in that sense. But yeah, it was tough for the entire industry. The whole industry just stopped. We did manage to get the Mischief Movie Night In stuff going, which is the modern iteration of Lights Camera Improvise, the improv show that we now do under the title Movie Night In, Mischief Movie Night In, one of those. And we did that during lockdown. We did shows, live stream shows from a little underground theatre in London. We all got together. We were all tested and doing all the stuff to make sure we could work together in that little cohort. And we were isolated from everyone else in our lives. And we spent a few weeks putting those out live. That was really fun.
Yeah. So would you say that the theatre industry has managed to, has it fully recovered yet from COVID?
I think so. Yeah, I think that the COVID hit has now gone, and it's back to where it was before. You'd need to ask a producer who's more on the business side of things, really, for the details. I think it has recovered. I think the industry is also it's always changing and evolving, and it's in a different place now to where it ever was. Yeah, the landscape is always shifting.
Yeah. So you were then commissioned to make 6 episodes of the Goes Wrong show. So how did that come about, and how was that like curating some more stories with more like different genres, like a court one,
Yeah.
Christmas ones, lots of different things?
Yeah, that was really, really fun. That had been the goal for a long time, way back before we managed to get Peter Pan on TV. The goal was always get a TV series and find the way that it works. And it was always slightly experimental. We didn't really know what the best format was. Was it best to have a live audience in the room with a laugh track? Was it better to do the whole thing in a theater maybe rather than in a studio? Yeah, all these questions that we couldn't find the answer to without just trying it. But after we did Peter Pan Goes Wrong on TV, and then we did Christmas Carol Goes Wrong, that's what it took for the BBC to finally go, okay, you can have a show. We'll commission you for a proper 6-episode thing. So then me and Hen and John got together. We did a little writers' retreat to write those episodes. We went to to an Airbnb out in the West Midlands somewhere, and we wrote the episodes. Had a lot of fun doing it, and it was great to have the freedom to try all these different genres. And even then, though, I remember us being very uncertain for a long time about exactly what the shape of the show was going to be. We thought maybe it was actually going to be all in one set, and it would all be set in this house, and each episode would be a different genre within the same house. You know what I mean? So it would start with like a historical, like 16th century, the house right at the beginning, and we'd do a sort of historical drama. And then the next episode, we'd have jumped forward 100 years, and it would be like a horror set in the 1700s or something like that, but all within the same building. That was there was a possibility that the show would have looked like that, and it could have. And it was a bit of a toss of a coin whether or not we'd go down that route. We ended up going with the full reset every week. Let's just have a different set, a different genre. Yeah, great fun though. Really fun, experimental, kind of out there bit of TV that I don't think anyone has done before or since. Something quite as strange as that. It was, it was his own thing, which I really liked.
But it found its audience with millions of viewers per episode. And so how was the filming like with the Going Wrong show compared to being on stage and doing a normal play?
It was weirdly quite similar, actually, partly because it was so expensive to do, so incredibly expensive to do, that we, as theatre performers, we were determined to treat it like a theatre show and get it right. as you do in the theatre, you get it right first time. You have to, every single time, you must hit every single line and every single beat perfectly dead on. Whereas typically in TV, you would be able to mess stuff up, stop, go back, go again. But we didn't have the time to do that. We knew, every time we get halfway through a scene and someone plubs a line, that we're essentially losing 20 minutes of our record time that's gonna bite us, because we're in this really narrow window of time we have to get it all recorded in. Because, like I say, everything was so expensive. So we treated it like that. We rehearsed it to death. We went over everything again and again and again and again. We had really long rehearsal processes for each episode, and we do trial audiences would come in and watch, and we'd then rewrite. And we made sure that by the time we got to filming it, we treated it, like I say, like a theatrical production. So pretty much we'd get it right first time. Every scene was run twice. We'd do it all the way through and then go back and do it all again, just to make sure that all the cameras were in the right place and that, give ourselves options. But through the 12 or 13 episodes that we did of the whole thing, it was very, very rare for us to make a mistake. It was very rare for us to do it in the TV way of, stop, give that another go, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It was we had quite like a militant sort of get it right.
Yeah.
attitude.
But I suppose that means it feels more authentic to the viewer.
Yeah. And it was all for us about the people in the room. We were performing it to a live audience, and so we treated it like we would a theatre show performing for that live audience. You get it right, you don't mess up your lines.
And then it got a second series. But were you sad to see that it had another series, or was it like you've done 13 stories? It would be quite hard to write a lot more.
I think it's a bit of both. I think that we would have, if they'd offered us a third series, we would have done it. We would have probably reinvented it a bit. By that point, we had learned our lesson, I think, about the different genres and how best it worked. And we actually had this idea that we would go back to something like the house thing that I described, where it would all be on one set. And we had this slightly more abstract idea that it would be a sort of abstract theatrical set for this third series, where we'd have 3 sort of platforms and we'd have walls that would remain there every time, and then we would build different locations around those more abstract spaces. It would give us a bit more freedom and be less expensive. So we had ideas, we had lots of stuff we wanted to do. We had this crazy idea of doing an episode set entirely in a fish tank. That would have been fun. We had lots of cool things that we never got to do. So it's sad that I am sad we didn't get to see what the third series would have been. But at the same time, we had been through most of the classic genres, and we were aware of that, and we were aware that it would have to get weirder in order to keep going. Hence the fish tank. We'd have to get pretty out there, and it would quite quickly change into a different kind of show. But really, the reason it didn't carry on more than anything is it's quite boring reason that it was just too expensive. I've talked about how expensive it was. It really was expensive because we were building an entire new set every week. That's really, really tough to do. And it's also really expensive generally to do a multi-camera sitcom setup. It's a very expensive way to make a show. It's very expensive to have a live studio audience there. So even though it was popular, it was a really popular show. We had, plenty of people watching each episode. It just was never really going to be enough to justify the massive cost. So it's bittersweet. I can totally understand why they didn't want to keep it going, and part of me kind of agrees with them. Part of me is like, yeah, I love the show. I wish we could have done more, but can I really say that it's worth basically the cost of a house each episode? You could buy someone a beautiful country house. Is it worth that to make the show? I don't know. It feels wasteful a little bit.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I saw an interview with one of you and saying about a Mischief movie. That would be the absolute dream. Would that still be on the cards eventually in the future?
Yeah. It's on the cards. I mean, there are lots of things on the cards, I would say. To set the scene for this answer, I would say that there are always so many prospects that we are exploring. At any given time, we probably have 10 different possible productions on the cards. we're talking about doing musicals, we're talking about doing movies, we're talking about a new stage show, multiple new stage shows. And that's just kind of the way that the industry works. The way that you have to operate is that you have to constantly be putting more and more irons in the fire in the hope that one of them will come to something. So, out of those 10 or 15 projects, maybe 2 or 3 will happen. So, yeah, one of the projects that we've talked about and we have ideas for is a movie, a goes wrong kind of movie. But it's so early days, it's so early days. And getting a movie made is probably going to be the most difficult thing we've ever done. And we've done some really difficult things, but that's top of the list in terms of, difficulty and cost and
Yeah, I
the
can
odds
imagine.
being so heavily stacked against you. It's really hard to get a movie. So who knows if it will ever actually happen.
Yeah, so there's lots of things on the cards.
Yeah, lots of things that could happen. Lots of things that might.
So, do you ever get often recognised in the street when you're out? Does that happen? And
Yeah.
how's that feeling?
Yeah, oh, it's really nice. It happens. I don't go out that much. I'm quite quite an introverted guy. I suppose I also work from home a lot of the time, so I spend most of my days indoors. If I am out, I get recognized maybe once every couple of weeks, once a week. Not a huge amount. So it's always nice when it happens. I think if it happened every day, I'd probably find it quite tedious. But the frequency it currently happens, it's lovely. People are very kind and generally, nice. That no one's ever recognized me and gone, "Oh, I hate your show." It's always pleasant.
Maybe in America.
Maybe in America, where I died a few times on stage and people really didn't like me. So there's at least a few thousand Americans out there who don't like me. I know that.
So if you could explore a completely different genre from comedy, either as a writer or performer, what would it be and why?
Ooh, I've tried doing things other than comedy and I never stick to it. It never, I lose interest every time I try and write something other than comedy. I do love horror. I have a real interest in horror, and I've actually one of the many projects I have on the go is writing a horror novel, which I've started, but will I ever complete it? Who knows? But yeah, I'd love to have a go at proper horror, particularly in theatre. Horror can be really, really good. I love an effective horror in a theatre because it's so immediate. You get so much more than watching a horror movie or TV show. So much more effective if you can do it right in a theatre. It can be amazing.
Yeah. Um, what's your favourite moment from your career?
Wow, favorite moment. Gosh, thinking about the times I've been happiest, it's always doing improv. The highlights of my career have always been on stage doing Mischief Movie Night. With more often than not even doing it, just being part of the show and watching someone else do something really funny. Some of my favorite times have been watching Josh Elliott in particular and Harry Kershaw, two of the other guys in the show. They're two of the funniest people. Henry Lewis as well, and Brian E. Corrigan. They're all so good. They're all so funny. But seeing them do some of the most incredible funny stuff, that's what really sticks out of everything, of just being the most joy I've ever had, most joy I've ever experienced, of just absolutely losing my mind laughing, watching them do crazy things. Henry Lewis being an armoire, Harry Kershaw putting on some insane glasses and being dealt one tussle. There was a scene in one of the shows years ago where Josh Elliott played. This is a dark one. He did a flashback to when he was in the womb. He had a twin brother in the womb who he killed in the womb. And it was just a flashback that happened of Josh Elliott and Matt Cavendish, one of the other guys. Josh was like cuddling his in utero brother and then took his umbilical cord and choked him to death with it and then cuddled his dead brother's corpse. That was incredibly funny. I was just weeping with laughter at how dark and sinister that was. Oh, amazing. So yeah, there you go. It's always in the improv.
Yeah, what's like the highest point, the most like pinch yourself moment that you've experienced, where you think like this is
Moment.
insane?
I mean that on that stage at Canterbury, I think is up there. And I probably would have been that at the Royal Albert Hall doing Royal Variety if I hadn't been out of my mind with terror. That would have been a moment of, wow, this is really cool. Yeah, performing for the first time in front of those giant audiences is always a big, big moment.
Yeah, I can imagine it must feel just so immense.
Mm.
What's been your lowest?
Ooh, now so many low points to choose from. Well, this is interesting because my lowest points partly are also in improv. The really tough times do tend to be in the show as well. When things don't work, when you're having a really bad show and the audiences aren't enjoying it, and you try something and it fails, or you tell a joke and it goes to silence. Those are some real low points. Those are tough. But actually, as well as that, just recently, the thing I touched on earlier, those times in America where I was doing Peter Pan and the audience turned against me, I found those really tough. Um, it's never nice to have 1,000 people suddenly not like you anymore and really
Yeah,
not like you as a person and feel that they've actually turned against you and that they don't like what you're saying. And, it was always my fault. I was always able to laugh it off as just like, this is part of the process. Okay. Americans, don't like it when you call a child stupid in the audience. That was a line for some reason that I always found. In the UK, you can do that and people will laugh. In America, if there's a little kid and you're doing a whole routine with him and you go, "Come on, you stupid boy," then literally the audience will go, "Oh, we don't like that. You don't
yeah.
call a child stupid." You know, weird little
I
things
can
like that.
I can imagine that feeling so like uncomfortable.
Yeah, really uncomfortable, really, really uncomfortable. And then to have to, that happens midway through the show, and then to have to do the next 40 minutes of the show knowing that the audience have turned against you and they're not going to laugh at your jokes anymore.
Yeah,
They're not going to be clapping for you at the end. That's a really horrible moment. That's really grates at you. That wears you down.
yeah.
But you got to put up
So
with it
what?
to figure it out.
Yeah, yeah, true. So what does an average day and an average week in your life look like?
Well, like I say, I'm pretty introverted, probably. My average day is sitting where I am now at the computer, writing things, editing our podcast. We have a D&D podcast we run, and I edit the episodes for that, writing new episodes for that as well. Um, yeah, it's a lot of work sat at a computer, and then occasionally going out to get food and coming back and sitting at the computer again. I'm just a bit of a house nerd, honestly. Quite happy here. I love creating things. For me, that's the pleasure in my day. Everyone has different things. I was thinking about this recently. Like my dad was a big foodie and really loved to go out and go to different restaurants and eat all the different delicious foods. And that's just never been my thing at all. I'm for me, it's all about mental and creative stimulation. So I spend my days sat here indulging in that. And the average week, well, it's a few days of that, and then sometimes it's going out and socializing or staying in and socializing more often. So I'll have friends come around and we'll play games, we'll play board games together, or play D&D or watch a movie or something. I'm a big lonely nerd. It's the answer I'm getting at, you know. And I
um,
have, I live with my partner Ellie, and we have a lot of fun here. We just play around with each other all the time. That's it.
yeah. Sounds like a great life, really.
I love it.
So how much do you have to do to with like the day to day of Mischief as like Mischief Theatre as the company?
Oh, very little. I'm honestly not the. If you want to talk about Mischief as a company, you want to talk to Henry Lewis and Jonathan Sayer. Those are the two guys who deal with all of that. I will occasionally, I'm on Zoom calls now and then. Very occasionally, we get together and have a meeting as a company about, yeah, more generally about what the shows are that we're going to put on, what's the company doing in general. But those are sort of once or twice a year, really. So the rest of us are pretty hands off.
Yeah. Um, so with the play that goes wrong and many other long-running shows in the West End, they're like open-ended. With the play that goes wrong currently booking until is it next year at some point?
Yeah, I think so. I think it books in sort of 9-month blocks at
So
the moment.
what is like the making like the decision making process behind deciding whether to like close a show or extend like the booking period another 9 months?
Yeah, it's very complex. I mean, it's a negotiation between the producer and the theatres. So the theatre that we're in is owned by NIMAX, one of the big theatre owning companies. So there's sort of 4 or 5 companies in the UK that own all the London West End venues. And so the head of NIMAX will, have a conversation with Kenny Wax, our producer, and they will, between them, decide whether or not it's good to keep it going, really. There are things that there is a sort of break clause thing where if your show doesn't meet its running costs for 2 weeks in a row, then the theatre can kick you out. They can just say, that's it, you're out. And I think we haven't hit that, so we're fine. But even if we were to, after 10 years, I think it's unlikely they would kick us out. I think it's more likely the theatre would see our side of it and say, you know what, this is a blip. It's going to come back. Don't worry about it. If that were to happen, I'd hope. There's a lot of goodwill there. We've been there for a long time. Kenny and NIMAX know they know have worked together so much on so many different shows. So it's all very friendly. It's all very amicable. But it's just, it's a bit of a negotiation. Do we want to kick you out? Do we want the theatre? Do we want the theatre free so we can put another show in that might be more successful? That's always the question. And Kenny's thinking the same thing. Do I want to keep the show running, or do I want to cut my losses and put something on that might be more successful? Who knows?
Yeah. So every so often, the original company members come back together. Like recently, you did the Mischief movie night at the Other Palace in London. So how does that feel, coming all back together, being in a room again, just playing around?
Yeah, it's lovely. That's one of the things that I'm so fortunate in that, because of the way we started, we really are just a group of friends, and that's what we've always been. We've become a company. It's become our professional life and it's become our careers, but we're still just a group of friends who enjoy hanging out. And if we weren't working together, we'd still just be hanging out for fun. So it's a real treat to get together, especially to do that show, which, as I've said, is the source of all the most joyous experiences of my life. It's really, really great. And I loved it. I only did 10 shows at the Other Palace because I just had a load of other commitments I couldn't get out of. But they were great fun, and it really reminded me of how much I've missed doing that show. So I hope there'll be more. There have been rumours in the company that there might be another run at some point. Maybe this year, maybe next. But yeah, I would love to do more of that show. It's always such a pleasure.
How do you rehearse a show like Mischief Movie Night, with it being so improv based on what the audience suggests? How is it rehearsed?
So a lot of the rehearsal is basics of improv, because those are the things that you always can improve on. So what we call the big 3 rules: listen, accept, commit. So you can practice listening, in that you can just practice being really attentive all the time and making sure you don't miss anything. You can practice accepting in whatever anyone offers, whatever anyone puts out there, you just automatically and emphatically say yes to, which is just a skill that takes practice. It's you have to get into the habit of accepting anything that comes your way, and committing, which is more of an acting role, of just whatever it is you're doing, do it with absolute confidence, even if it's something you wouldn't choose to do, even if it's something you don't think is necessarily good. Do it. Commit to it 100%. So that's the basics that we'll cover, and as well as that, we'll rehearse story structure. We'll go over very loosely how structures are typically found in stories, because there are things that you can say appear in every single story. Every story will start with what we call the norm, the establishment of the way things are before they change. And then there will be a catalyst or an inciting incident, the thing that changes the norm and pushes the protagonist out of their comfort zone and into a new world. Those are things that are typical in every story. So, you can practice those things and make sure that they're there, make sure you don't skip any steps. And then, we'll just run a few shows doing that and keeping an eye on those things. It's very dry. It's quite dry and quite but then obviously we're just making each other laugh while we do that. But the comedy sits on top of it. And you have to just make sure the foundation is really strong underneath to make sure that the story structure is solid.
Yeah, I can imagine. And with it's rare in the industry you see the same group of actors really coming back like play after play, doing lots of playing different characters, but also playing the same characters in Peter Pan Goes Wrong, the Goes Wrong Show, the play that goes wrong, saying playing the same characters in the Cornley Polytechnic Society. So, like, what do you think is good about that?
It's funny, isn't it? Like, you don't see it often. I guess it must just be a really rare thing to have the right alchemy, to have the right blend of people. That's all it is. That's all I can put it down to. Is just that, particularly when me, Hen, and John get together and write things, we are able to tap into something that's really funny and really accessible. It just happens to be the case that that our three minds together make something that really works and hits the mainstream dead on. And it is all three of us, because we've all written stuff individually that has not been as successful, that has pulled too far in a different direction, that just hasn't naturally sat in that perfect little Goldilocks zone in the middle. So I think that's part of it, and it's also the rest of the team, the fact that we're all these really good friends, and that we happen to be it's a very talented team. It's a very talented group who are very good actors and very good comedians. It just all happened to come together just right. And there's absolutely no reason why anyone else couldn't do it. Other people can. I think you just have to find the right group, and you have to have the right work ethic. That's what made it special.
Yeah. So do you think will ever come a time where it will be the last time the Mischief gang performs together?
Ooh, that's interesting. Well, it will have to happen eventually, because we're going to die one day. But when will that be? I mean, it could be soon, it could be later. John occasionally talks about wanting to do the play that goes wrong when we're all 80. Wants us all to go back in for a one show where we're all really, really old. That would be fun. It would rely on us all making it to 80, which who knows. But yeah, one day I suppose it'll have to be the last one. I can't see us ever making the decision to disband. It doesn't feel like we're going to do a Beatles and just be like, you know what, enough. We're all going our own way. Because we can all tell that we're so much stronger together. We can tell that we are greater than the sum of our parts. Just from the experience of having, like I say, written stuff individually and written stuff together and worked on stuff with other groups and worked on stuff together, you can feel that it is such a strong company, such a strong unit group, that it would be virtually impossible to replicate that elsewhere. So I don't think we would choose to end it, but who knows? Anything can happen.
Yeah, true. So what are some of the biggest mistakes you've made on stage?
Ooh. Mistakes on stage in any particular show, or just generally?
Generally in your whole career.
My whole career, mistakes I've made. There was one performance of Comedy About a Bank Robbery where I became confused, where there were so in that show, and this requires a little bit of context, in that show there are two bits in one of the scenes that me and Henry Lewis do. My character comes in the first bit, and I go over to him and I shout at him. We have an argument, and then I leave. And then the second scene, I come on, and I'm very angry at him for not taking off his pants. American, because it's American. His trousers. And I'm telling him, take off your pants, and he's saying, no, don't. And then I rip his trousers off. Right. It makes sense in context, but that's all you need to know for now. That there's a bit where I come on and I scream at the guy and I rip his trousers off. And that's the order of those two scenes. So it goes first scene, and then there's 5 minutes, and then the second scene, I come on and rip his trousers off. One night doing Comedy About a Bank Robbery, I got confused. I just lost focus. And I came on stage and I did the second scene first. So it made no sense. There was none of the setup. The audience were baffled. Henry Lewis was baffled. I just came on and said, take off your pants. What are you doing? Take your pants off. And he obviously said, no, I'm not going to do that. Why do you want me to take my pants off? Because it made no sense. There was no setup for that. The intervening scenes hadn't happened yet to make sense of that occurrence. So I just stared at him for a while and shouted, take your pants off. And then I realized I'd done the wrong thing. And we just sort of ground to a halt and stared at each other. The audience were really confused. And then Chris Leesk just started the next scene and we moved on. And then 5 minutes later, because we were back on track, I had to come back in and do it again, and then come back in the right context now and say, take off your pants. And we did it again. And the audience were even more confused because they were just like, what? Is this like a time jump thing? Why did he do that? And then come back and do it again? And why does he want his pants to come up? It was so bizarre. Uh, and so that was probably my biggest professional error. I think the biggest mistake I've ever made, because I just crashed the show into a wall for 10 minutes, totally confusing everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, because I suppose with like the play that goes wrong, Peter Pan, I suppose if you make a minor mistake, it's kind of easier to cover up because
Yeah, because it's it's just jokes essentially.
yeah,
You can just move on. I've made lots of little mistakes in those shows. Everyone does. You miss a prop, you forget to bring on the right thing, you skip a line, that kind of stuff. But
yeah.
almost always, you just move to the next bit, and the audience forgets it ever happened. That one was like I completely pulled apart the fabric of the show for 10 minutes, and no one knew what was happening. And then we
Oh.
went back to doing the show again.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
Um, so who is your favourite playwright and why do you like them?
Ooh, favorite playwright. I'm a big fan of Jez Butterworth. Just a brilliant writer. Loved Jerusalem in particular. That's one of the best shows I've seen in a theatre. I really loved that. It's impossible to pick this one. I also really like James Graham. All of his shows are so clever and so tightly written and very, very funny. He's a very, very funny writer. There's so many other brilliant playwrights. Love Noel Coward. Love all Noel Coward's shows. Present Laughter is a really fantastic one. You haven't seen that? There's loads of great writers out there. I can't pick just one. I also, my favorite thing that's on at the moment is Operation Mincemeat. I think that's the best show, best musical in London at the moment. I won't say best show because we're on in London at the moment. But the best musical, definitely Operation Mincemeat. And the writers of that show, I don't know how they've listed it because I think it's like there's 5 of them. They're sort of a company in the same way that that we are, but it was written by the original cast. They're so good. I'm going to see if I can find a list of who actually wrote it. Does it say? Not really. Yeah, written by like David Cumming, Felix Hagen, Natasha Hodgson, Zoe Roberts. Natasha Hodgson is brilliant. She's one of the funniest people as well on the show. Love her writing, love her work, but love all of their writing and all of their work. So them.
Yeah. What's your favourite thing about acting?
Ooh, my favorite thing about acting. I love a connection to the audience. For me, that's always really exciting. I love a live audience and the live interplay. And obviously, my love of improv means that I particularly like when it's unplanned and when anything can happen. And within all of our shows, I've tried to always find a point where there's a bit of improv involved. So that's probably my favorite thing. Yeah, the live and creative, instant creative aspect of it.
What's your least favourite thing about acting?
The repetition. So I suppose it's the absolute polar opposite of what I've just said. The other end of the spectrum, where you do sometimes, if you're in a play, you have to do the exact same thing in the exact same way with the same intonation, with the same pace, and do the same moves every single night, sometimes twice a day. And you can start to feel a bit like a robot after a while. And I think probably over 1,500 performances of the play that goes wrong in the end.
Wow.
Yeah, and that is too much. That's too many times
Yeah.
to say the same words in the same way with the same movements. My brain is not built for that sort of thing. It starts to turn into jelly a little bit. Some people are better at it than others. There are some from the company who would happily go back into the play that goes wrong. I think it just doesn't bother them. They've just got the right mindset for it. But I have a brain that needs constant stimulation.
What is your favourite thing about writing?
Ooh, now writing, I've become over the years more of a writer than I am an actor. I start to identify myself more as a writer. And I really do love it. I love creating something completely from scratch. That's what's really thrilling about writing, is that you start with a blank page and you write something and then you have created. The experience, that feeling of satisfaction from having created something from nothing That's really, really exciting, especially when it's something good and you know that, you have entirely on your own, entirely using your own brain, you have conjured something from thin air. That's, it feels like a magic trick. It's amazing.
Yeah, I can imagine. And what is your least favorite?
Least favorite part of writing? Um, yeah, a similar answer to the acting thing. It's when it becomes the drudgery, which occasionally comes in. That after you've had the fun of creation, you've had the fun of conjuring something from thin air, then typically you have to spend months and months and months rewriting it and poring over every word and polishing and polishing and polishing. And sometimes that's fun, especially if you manage to really improve something. That can be really satisfying. You take a bit that was 4 or 5 lines that were okay, and you find a way of making it into a really, really strong bit. That's really satisfying. But sometimes you're just looking through blocks of text and saying, can we cut that word? Is there a better word for this? Can these two sentences be the other way around? Things like that. Just the tedium of writing.
Is it is it like hard when you've worked on a like play on a script for so long and stuff happens and it never works out, never comes to fruition? Is that
Yep,
hard?
yep, that's hard. That is hard, and it happens now and then. I've managed to over time learn enough about the process to try and avoid really getting hurt by that. Because if you write an entire long, massive thing and it goes nowhere, that's soul destroying. But I'm now experienced enough that I can tell when a project is worth spending more time on. So if a company or whatever, or anyone approaches me now saying we've got this idea for a show, can you write it? I'm now inoculated enough to know, if this is a good idea or not, and whether or not it's worth pursuing. And if it is a good idea, I won't write the entire thing, which is always the instinct of a young writer, a new writer, is to go, oh, you want me to write a show about 4 cows living in a field, whatever. Then they'll go, okay, and they'll go away and they'll write 12 episodes of that and waste a huge amount of time. Now I'm experienced enough to know, actually, don't do that. What you should do is write 3 pages and then take it back to them and say, what do you think of this? Is this actually something you want to pursue? And then if they do, you write 10 pages and then you write 30 pages. You do it bit by bit, rather than completely exposing yourself all at once.
Yeah. The last few questions, these are all about advice. So what advice would you give to someone trying to like write a play, trying to think of an idea? Like how do you think of your ideas?
God, I wish I knew. How do you think of your ideas? Um, you have to experience a lot. That's where ideas come from. It's from seeing lots of different things in the world. You can't have ideas if you just see and experience the same things every day. You'll only have those ideas. So read as much as you can, watch as much TV and film as you can, get out into the world and walk around and meet people and, travel the world as well. It's another really useful thing. Just fill your brain with as much input as possible. Just throw all different things into your eyes and into your ears, and then your very clever creative brain will scramble them up and find connections between them and find original ideas from that.
Yeah, and that's some great advice there. What advice would you give someone who wants to go into comedy writing and acting?
Yep. So first step is immersing yourself in it. You need to watch as much as you possibly can. Go and see live shows. Go and see stand-ups. Watch. There are so many available on YouTube and on Netflix and whatever. You just immerse yourself in stuff. Immerse yourself in stuff that you don't even like. Watch it through and analyze why you don't like it. Um, and then have a go. All you can really do is chuck stuff on a page and try it. It will be bad. That's the other bit of advice is don't blame yourself if it's bad, because anything you're doing for the first time you're going to be bad at, unless you happen to be Mozart. You're probably going to be bad at comedy for a long time, and you'll find that what you're really doing, even if you don't notice it, is just regurgitating stuff. You're just taking things that someone else did and doing it again, or doing it slightly differently, and that's all part of the process of learning. Don't blame yourself for doing that. That's just how the human brain works and how anyone learns to do anything. You have to start by imitating, and then you can start innovating. So yeah, initially immerse yourself and give it a go. Trust that it will be bad. Trust that it will get better.
Yeah, like when I first started this, it's really bad. The first few episodes, really bad. Now,
Yeah.
4.5 years in, okay. At this point,
Well, you're on a journey, you have to make mistakes. The only way you can learn anything is just by making mistake after mistake after mistake, and you get better.
yeah, that's very true. And as this podcast is called the Chase That Dream podcast, what advice would you give to someone who is just generally trying to chase their dream in life?
Ooh, general advice for chasing your dream. I would say don't look at the end result, because I think it can be too intimidating. Someone in any respect. I mean, I can only really talk about it in terms that I understand, which is writing and producing things. But from my perspective, if I wanted to write a brilliant play, the worst thing I could do is watch a brilliant play and think I'll just do that. You can't, because you'll be too intimidated. It will be too difficult. When you go and see a brilliant play, you have to remember that you're not seeing the hours of creation that went into it. You're seeing the finished product. You're not seeing the thousands of hours of practice and of mistakes that writer had to make to get there. Whatever it is you want to do, if you want to climb to the summit of Mount Everest, you can look at the summit and see this thing that's really, really high and impossible to achieve. But it all starts with a single step. That's the cliche, but you should only look at the thing that's right in front of you. Look at the summit, see what it is, and then remember that there are thousands of steps that you have to take to get there. And it's never easy. And people who make it look easy, they're only able to do that because they've spent so many years dealing with it being hard.
Yeah, that's some great advice there. Okay, thank you again, Henry, for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Brilliant. Thanks for having me.
That's all we've got time for in today's episode. We will be back with another great interview at the same time soon. But for now, goodbye.